At 7 o'clock in the morning, sunlight was already streaming through the curtains of my bedroom. I opened my eyes and lay there for a while, staring at the empty half of the bed. 7 years had passed, and I still expected to see Howard there. 7 years of going to sleep and waking up alone. My name is Agatha Baxter. I'm 68 years old, and I live in Villa Park, in the same house I grew up in. It's a two-story red brick house with white shutters and a small garden that my parents passed down to me. It was where I'd spent my childhood, where I'd returned with my husband after years of living in a rented apartment, where we'd raised our only son, Francis. I reached over to the bedside table for my glasses and slowly sat down on the edge of the bed. My joints were aching slightly, the promise of rain. Putting on my robe, I went down to the kitchen and put the kettle on. The kitchen was my pride. Spacious, with honey-colored wooden cabinets and dark granite countertops. Howard had installed the tile on the apron, white with a blue pattern. Every time I looked at it, I remembered him cursing through his teeth as he smoothed each piece. As the kettle boiled, I glanced out the window at my garden. The well-tended hydrangea bushes that Howard and I had planted the year he retired had grown and were now in full bloom. The lawn needed mowing. Francis had promised to come by on the weekend and help, but he'd probably find a reason not to again. The last 3 times I'd hired a neighborhood kid, $20 and the job was done. With a cup of tea, I settled into my favorite chair in the living room. Once upon a time, this room was always full of life. Francis and his friends, Howard and me on weekends, family gatherings. Now it was quiet. I rarely turned on the TV. I preferred to read or listen to the radio. There were family photos on the walls, the wedding, Francis at graduation, our last trip to Yellowstone with Howard the year before he died. Howard died suddenly, a heart attack. We had just celebrated his 70th birthday, making plans for a trip to the ocean. 3 days later, I was alone. The funeral was a blur. Francis flew in with Judith, and they stayed with me for 2 weeks. Then they left, and from then on, our relationship became more and more strained. Judith never really liked me. Tall, slim, with impeccable manicures and a condescending smile. She worked for an insurance company, always dressed smartly, and always had a special pleasure in talking about her successes. Francis had met her at a corporate party. He worked as a process engineer in a food processing plant, and their company had signed a contract with Judith's insurance company. 6 months later, they were married. Howard always got along with her, joking about her manner as if she were the Queen of England, and Judith laughed with him. I couldn't get through that polished, shiny wall of hers. Everything changed after Howard died. She wasn't trying to be nice anymore, and I wasn't trying to please her anymore. Francis called once a week, usually on Sundays. The conversations were short, how things were going, if the house was okay, if he needed help. He came once a month, sometimes less. After each visit, I noticed his gaze lingering on the antique clock in the living room, on the silver candlesticks from my grandmother, on the collection of porcelain figurines. Sometimes he would casually wonder if this house was too big for me, if I was thinking of moving to something more compact and modern. I knew what he was thinking. The inheritance. About what would be left after me. A house in a nice neighborhood, savings that Howard and I had saved up all our lives, a few valuable antiques, shares in companies that Howard had wisely invested in back in the 90s. Not millions of dollars, of course, but a very respectable sum. Howard and I had made a will 15 years ago. Everything was split between me and Francis. After Howard died, I didn't go through the papers. I didn't have to. An only child, who else would I leave it all to? But lately, I've been thinking more and more that I might want to revisit some of it, especially after what happened at Thanksgiving. They arrived 3 hours late. The turkey was parched, the vegetables were cold, and the apple pie I'd baked that morning didn't look so appetizing anymore. Judith didn't even apologize. They were stuck shopping, picking out new furniture for the living room. All evening she talked about the chandelier she'd ordered from Italy and how much the new couch cost. And then she started looking at my set. "Oh, Agatha, these plates are so vintage. They must be worth a fortune." She was fiddling with a plate from a set I inherited from my mother. "They're family, Judith. And I wish you'd be more careful with them," I said, taking the plate from her. "Come on, Mom," Francis interjected. "They're just dusting in your cupboard. We'd display them as an art object." They're not dusty. I use them for Christmas and special occasions. Whatever you say, Judith shrugged. I just thought they would look better in a modern interior. They spent the rest of the evening walking around the house, talking about what and where they would put it if it were theirs. I felt like a ghost about to be evicted. When they left, I couldn't sleep for a long time. I thought back to when Francis was little, how excited he was when Howard taught him to ride his bike, how proud he was of his first model airplane that he built himself. What happened to that boy? When did he turn into this calculating man who looks at my house as a future acquisition? The next day, I called Carol. We'd been friends since high school, worked at the same accounting firm together, retired together. She lived 3 houses down from me, and we often met for a cup of tea. Are they at it again? Carol asked after hearing me talk about my son and daughter-in-law's visit. We were sitting on her veranda watching the neighbors' children playing on the lawn. Yes, and more frank each time, I sighed. Francis even asked me if I was thinking about a will. He said, "At your age, you should be very specific." Can you imagine? Carol shook her head. Agatha, you're too kind to them. If I were you, I'd have reconsidered the will a long time ago. And what would you do? Disinherit your only son? Why disinherit him? There are other options. You could leave some to him and some to charity. Or you could set up a trust with certain conditions. I've been thinking, Carol was always practical. Maybe she's right. You know Gail Albright, remember her from accounting? She left her son the house, but on the condition that he couldn't sell it for 10 years. She split the money between her son and her grandkids, and the grandkids wouldn't get their share until after college. Did it work? It worked. Her son's a sweetheart now. He visits her regularly at the nursing home, takes care of her. Sometimes a bit of carrot and stick is just what grown-up kids who forget their responsibilities need. I sipped my tea, mulling over her words. Maybe I really should have reconsidered the will. It wasn't that I wanted to punish Francis, but the idea of having some leverage seemed more and more appealing. Do you remember Francis sitting with Howard in the hospital? I asked quietly. Of course, Carol nodded. He came on the 3rd day and left a week later, even though Howard had been there almost a month. He said he had important meetings at work, that he couldn't cancel his business trip. And Judith didn't even show up, Carol added. She said she was afraid of hospitals. We didn't talk for a while. Carol poured more tea. Do you know what hurt me the most? I went on. When Howard and I were helping Francis with the down payment on their house, he said, "Thank you. I'll never forget that. You can always count on me." Now I call him to ask him to help with the lawn, and he's always busy. Agatha, Carol put her hand on mine. Be careful with them. They're obviously counting on your money and property, and the older you get, the more insistent they'll be. Do you think Francis might... I didn't finish the sentence, but Carol understood. No, I don't think he's capable of anything really terrible. But pressuring you, manipulating you, trying to control your finances, he could. Especially if Judith is the one pushing you around. And I think that's all she's waiting for. I nodded. Carol always had a way of seeing right through people. Just be on your guard, she said. And maybe talk to a lawyer about the will, just in case. When I got home, I stood in front of Howard's picture for a long time. He was smiling from the picture, and I missed his quiet confidence, his ability to make tough decisions. What would you do, Howard? I whispered, touching my fingers to the frame. What would you do? There was no answer, of course, but I knew my husband. He had always been fair and straightforward. Never let anyone sit on your neck, he often said, even if it's our son. I walked over to the secretary, opened the bottom drawer, and pulled out a folder of papers. The will, made 15 years ago, looked just as I remembered it. All the property was divided between me and Francis in the event of Howard's death, and everything went to Francis in the event of my death. But the world had changed in those 15 years. Francis changed. I've changed. Maybe it was time to change that will too. I put the papers back in the drawer. The decision hadn't been made yet, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was back in control. And it was a good feeling. I decided to have a family dinner. Nothing fancy, just an attempt to mend relationships. 2 weeks had passed since our conversation with Carol, and all the while I'd been thinking about my will, about Francis, about how our relationship had changed. Maybe I was overthinking things. Maybe I should have taken the first step. Friday morning, I dialed my son's number. He didn't answer right away, and when he did, there was tension in his voice. Mom? Is something wrong? Why is something wrong? I tried to sound casual. I just thought maybe you and Judith could come over for dinner on Sunday. I haven't seen you in a while. There was a pause. I could practically see Francis mentally going over his excuses. Sunday? Let me think. I don't think we have anything planned. I'll have to check with Judith. I'll call you back, okay? He didn't call back. Instead, he got a text this evening. Sunday at 6 will be fine. Can I get you anything? I replied that I didn't need anything, just show up. Then I made a menu. I decided to make beef stroganoff, Francis's favorite dish since he was a kid. For dessert, chocolate cake with cherry sauce, and an avocado salad for Judith, who was always on some kind of diet. On Saturday, I did some cleaning. The house was already clean. I'd always kept it tidy, but I wanted it to look spotless. I dusted the photos, polished the silver candlesticks, chose a white linen tablecloth for the dining room table, embroidered around the edges. I found the old monogrammed napkins that Howard and I had gotten as a silver wedding present. Then I stood at the closet for a long time, wondering what to wear. I settled on a navy blue dress with a white collar. Classics never go out of style, and I wanted to look elegant. Judith always dressed in the latest fashions, and I sometimes felt old-fashioned around her. But not this time. That evening, Carol called. "How are the preparations going?" she asked. "Everything's going according to plan. Tomorrow morning I'll do the cake and the main course." "Are you sure that's a good idea?" I could hear the doubt in Carol's voice. "About what?" "Inviting them over. After everything you've told me." I sighed. "Francis is my son, Carol. Whatever's going on between us, I want to try to make things right. Maybe I really do spend too much time alone and I'm starting to make up things that aren't there." "Agatha, you're not the type to make up problems out of thin air. You've always been a realist." "I know." I walked over to the window looking out at the garden in the evening gloom. "But this is family. I have to at least try." Carol was quiet. "Okay, but be careful. And call me after their visit, okay?" "I will." Sunday started with cooking. I woke up early, at first light. The birds were chirping outside the window and the day promised to be clear and warm. Perfect weather for a family dinner. I started with the cake. I beat butter with sugar, added eggs, sifted flour, and cocoa. I've always loved cooking. As a child, I often helped my mother in the kitchen, and when I married Howard, cooking became my main hobby. He always appreciated my efforts, even when my experiments failed. And Francis loved to sit in the kitchen as a child, watching me cook and begging for a spoonful of cake batter. Memories came flooding back. Francis, still very young, standing on the chair next to me, trying to help knead the cookie dough. Francis, the teenager, gorging on his third serving of spaghetti after soccer practice. Francis leaving for college and me packing him containers of homemade food. When did everything change? When did my caring boy turn into this cold, calculating man? Maybe it started when he met Judith. She was ambitious, driven from a family of hereditary lawyers. I remember the first time they met. She looked at our house appraisingly, as if estimating its value. Howard whispered to me, "Our boy's found himself a shark." But he always had a way with her. And me. I put the cake in the oven and started preparing the meat for the beef stroganoff. I sliced the beef into thin strips, cut the onion into half rings. I prepared all the ingredients for the sauce. Time passed without a second thought. I set the table, arranged the candles, took out a bottle of good red wine that Howard kept for special occasions. At 4 o'clock, the cake was ready and cooling on the rack. The sauce for the meat was simmering on a low heat, and I went to clean up. I took a bath with lavender oil, dried my hair, and put on light makeup. I put on the blue dress and the pearl earrings Howard had given me for our 30th anniversary. I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked good for my 68th. Gray, sure, but my hair was still thick. Wrinkles, but my face still had an oval shape. And I kept my figure in shape by regularly going to yoga for the elderly at the local senior center. At 6:30, I returned to the kitchen to finish the main course. I quickly fried the meat, added the sauce, and left it to simmer under the lid. Cooked rice as a side dish. The finishing touch was an avocado salad for Judith. At exactly 6 o'clock, everything was ready. I looked out the window, expecting to see Francis's car, but the street was empty. No big deal, I thought. Probably a little traffic. 6:30. No sign of Francis or Judith. I called, but my son's cell phone was unavailable. I sent a text saying, "Everything all right? I'll expect you for dinner." At 7, I started to worry. Had something happened? An accident? Maybe they got sick? But why didn't they call? At 8:30, the phone rang. I rushed to the phone. "Mom, sorry, we're running a little late." Francis sounded carefree, as if being an hour and a half late was nothing. "What's wrong?" I was worried. "It's nothing." Judith decided to stop at the mall, and there was a line for parking. "Anyway, we're on our way. We'll be there in about 20 minutes. They got there at 8 o'clock. The stroganoff was cold by then, so I had to reheat it. The avocado salad was a little wilted. The candles I'd lit by 6 were almost burned out, so I replaced them with new ones. The doorbell rang sharply, demanding. I hurried to open it. Francis stood on the threshold with a bottle of wine in his hands. Judith followed him up the stairs, tapping her heels. She was wearing a new suit, light gray, with a perfectly tailored skirt and jacket. Her hair was styled in an elaborate updo, her makeup flawless. She looked like she was going to a business meeting, not a family dinner. "Mom," Francis kissed my cheek. "I'm sorry I'm late. Traffic. And the lines at the store," Judith added, kissing my cheek too. She smelled of expensive perfume and something else. "Champagne? Had you been somewhere before?" I asked, letting them into the house. "We just met some friends for brunch," Francis said casually, handing me a bottle of wine. "This is for you. Argentine, 2018. "Thank you." I took the bottle. "Come in. Everything's ready." We went into the dining room. Judith looked around as if searching for changes from her last visit. "Oh, are you still using those old candlesticks?" she asked, pointing to the silver candelabra. "They belong to my grandmother," I replied. "An heirloom." Of course," Judith nodded. "It's just that it's more minimalist now, but it's certainly a classic." I ignored her comment and invited them to sit down at the table. Francis helped Judith to a chair, then sat down himself. I brought a dish of beef stroganoff and rice from the kitchen. "Oh, stroganoff!" Francis exclaimed with feigned delight. "I haven't had it in ages." "It's your favorite dish," I said as I poured him a portion. "It used to be," he smiled. "Judith and I are more into modern cooking now, aren't we, darling?" Judith nodded, looking at her plate doubtfully. "That's a lot of carbs," she said, "but I'll make an exception tonight." I poured the wine into glasses and we started dinner. The conversation didn't flow. Francis was talking about some new project that was going to make the company millions. Judith talked about vacation plans. They were going to Italy to stay in a 5-star hotel on the Amalfi Coast. "How are you doing, Mom?" Francis finally asked when the main course was finished. "I'm fine," I answered. "I'm gardening, going to yoga, seeing Carol." "Carol?" Judith raised her eyebrows. "Is that your friend who lives a few doors down?" "Yeah, we've been friends since we were kids." "That's nice," Judith said. "A true friendship that lasts a lifetime." There was a condescension in her voice, as if the friendship of older women was something amusing and not worth serious consideration. "Do you have friends like that, Judith? That you've known all your life?" I asked. She hesitated to answer. "That's not the way it is in our circle. People come and go. Connections are important, contacts. Francis and I often organize networking parties. Do you know what that is?" "Imagine I do," I replied dryly. "I was an accountant for 40 years, remember?" Judith blushed slightly, but quickly pulled herself together. "Of course, it's just that it's so popular now. Everyone's talking about social connections and how important it is to be in the right circles." I brought dessert a chocolate cake with cherry sauce. Francis perked up. "That's what I remember. Your specialty cake. When I was a kid, I could eat half of it in one sitting." "I know," I smiled. "That's why I made it." Judith refused the dessert, citing her diet. Francis ate his piece with apparent pleasure. "Terrific, Mom, as always." As the dinner went on, I sensed more and more falseness in their behavior. Francis praised the food, but his compliments sounded contrived. Judith kept the conversation going, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. They kept exchanging glances, as if they had some secret plan. I watched them, trying to figure out what was going on. Something was wrong. I could feel it with every cell in my body. The same instincts that had helped me raise Francis told me they were hiding something. "So what's new with you guys?" I asked, pouring myself more wine. "Besides work and vacation plans?" Francis and Judith looked at each other. "Well, we're thinking of moving," Francis said. "We're looking for a bigger house in a better neighborhood." "Really? Can you afford it?" I asked bluntly. Judith tensed up. "Of course we can. Francis got a raise last quarter and I got a promotion." "That's wonderful," I nodded, though my gut told me there was something they weren't telling me. "Where are you looking for a house?" "Highland Park," Francis said. "There are excellent schools there and—" "Schools?" I raised my eyebrows in surprise. "Are you planning children?" There was another exchange of glances. "Maybe," Judith answered evasively. "But it's more than that. It's an upscale neighborhood, a good investment." "I see." I sipped my wine. "When do you plan to move?" "We've just started looking at options," Francis said. "Nothing concrete yet." The conversation faded again. I could see Judith glancing at her watch. Francis tapped his fingers nervously on the table. The atmosphere was tense, the air electrified. "By the way, Mother," Francis said suddenly, pretending it had just occurred to him, "have you thought about moving to a smaller place? This house is too big for one person." And so we were back on the subject again. I could feel the irritation rising inside. "I like my house, Francis. I'm not going anywhere." "But think of the effort it takes to maintain it," Judith said. "The cleaning, the repairs, the garden. At your age, it must be exhausting." "At my age," I repeated slowly, "I'm perfectly capable of doing all that. And I like gardening. It's not tedious, it's enjoyable." "But it's not rational," Judith insisted. "You could sell the house, buy an apartment in a modern complex with security and maintenance, and the rest of the money, well, invest or travel." I gave her a long look. "Or give it to you. That's what you're getting at, isn't it, Judith?" She blushed slightly, but quickly pulled herself together. "I'm not talking about us, Agatha. I'm talking about you, about your comfort." "My comfort is my home," I said firmly. "And I'm not going anywhere." Francis sighed. "Mom, no one is forcing you to move right now. We're just suggesting that you think about the future." "It's not like you're getting any younger." "Thanks for reminding me," I said dryly. I hadn't realized. "I didn't mean that," Francis grimaced. "It's just, maybe we should talk about options. A nursing home, for instance. They have all the amenities, medical staff around the clock." "Francis," I interrupted, "I'm 68, not 98. I don't need round-the-clock medical staff. I'm healthy, active, and perfectly capable of taking care of myself." "Right now, yes," Judith nodded. "But no one knows what will happen in a year, 2 years, 5 years. It's better to plan ahead." I looked at them both. Their concern for my future was so transparent that it didn't even offend, more like regret. When did my son become like this? When did money and possessions become more important to him than his relationship with his mother? "You know what?" I said, putting aside my napkin. "Let's change the subject. Tell me about your vacation plans. Italy, you say? What cities are you going to visit?" Judith, obviously pleased with the change of subject, began to tell me about their itinerary: Rome, Florence, the Amalfi Coast. Francis picked up, describing the hotel they had booked, but I could see that this was only a reprieve. They would return to the subject of my house, my will, my future. It was only a matter of time. And as I listened to them talk about their planned trip, a strange feeling grew inside, a mixture of sadness and determination. I realized that something had to change. This can't go on like this. I have to do something, and soon. The conversation about Italy didn't last long. I saw Judith constantly glancing at her watch, as if she had more important things to do. Francis kept checking his cell phone. It was as if they were tolerating my company, performing some unpleasant duty. "Why don't we go into the living room?" I suggested it when the dessert was finished. "I'll make some fresh tea." "Good idea." Francis nodded, clearly glad for the change of scenery. We moved into the living room. Judith sat down on the sofa with her foot on the leg, looking around the room. Francis sat in Howard's chair, which always gave me mixed feelings. On the one hand, it was nice to see a son in his father's place. On the other hand, Francis was so unlike Howard in his attitudes and behavior. I brought tea in the old china set I'd gotten from my mother. Judith frowned slightly as she looked at the gold-edged cups with pink flowers. What a vintage, she said. Yes, my mother's, I replied, pouring the tea. She got it as a wedding present from her mother. It's over 80 years old. And you still use it? Judith wondered. Isn't it a collector's item? It should be kept behind glass. Why? I shrugged. Things are meant to be used. What's the point of a beautiful dish if no one drinks tea from it? Judith exchanged a glance with Francis. This silent dialogue irritated me more and more. It was as if they had conspired beforehand and were now carrying out some kind of plan. Mom, Francis began after a few sips of tea, Judith and I wanted to talk to you about something. Here it is. I felt my muscles tense. A premonition of something unpleasant hung in the air. I'm listening, I answered calmly. The thing is, he cast a quick glance at Judith, as if looking for support. We're worried about you. You live alone in a big house, and every year it gets harder and harder for you to maintain it. So we thought, you found a nursing home for me. I finished for him. Yeah, you mentioned that. Sunset Gardens, right? It's not just a nursing home, Judith stepped forward. It's a state-of-the-art complex with apartments for independent living. There's a swimming pool, a gym, a movie theater, a library, and there's medical staff around the clock if anything happens. Sounds like a hotel, I said. But I prefer my own house. Mom, Francis sighed, you can't live here alone forever. What if you fall? What if you get sick at night? Who's gonna help? I have a panic button, I pointed to the bracelet on my arm, and neighbors who stop by regularly, and Carol who calls every day. That's not enough. Judith shook her head. At your age, you need constant supervision. At my age, I repeated slowly, I'm doing just fine on my own. I don't need supervision as if I were a child or an incapacitated person. No one's saying you're incapacitated, Francis said with a wince. It's just that the risks increase with age. That's a statistic. What statistics are you talking about? I was starting to lose my patience. Are you talking about people my age being evicted from their homes to make room for the next generation? Mom, you've got it all wrong. Francis rubbed his forehead like he always did when he was nervous. We're worried about your safety and comfort. Are you? I set the cup down on the table. Then why don't you visit me more often? Why don't you call, take an interest in my life? If you care so much about my well-being, why do you only show up when you need something? Francis flared up. It's not fair. We have our own work, our own worries. We can't come every week. I'm not asking every week, but once a month? Or at least a genuine interest over the phone. Your calls on Sundays last 5 minutes, and half the time you're distracted by something else. I'm sorry I'm not living up to your expectation, that Francis exclaimed. I have my own life, Mom. My own family, my own problems. I can't keep thinking about whether you're bored or lonely. I'm not asking you to think about me all the time, I replied. I'm asking for basic respect and attention. The things I've given you your whole life. Oh, don't start with the sacrifices you've made for me. Francis rolled his eyes. I've heard that story a million times. How you gave up what you wanted. How you did everything for your family. I never talked about sacrifices. I was taken aback by his reaction. I loved you and your father, and everything I did with joy. But you expect the same selflessness from me, Francis continued. You want me to drop everything and come at the first call, to call every day, to be interested in every detail of your life. It's not like that. It is, he raised his voice. You've always been like this. You've always wanted to control my life, where to go, where to work, who to marry. And now that I'm finally living my own life, making my own decisions, you're not happy. I looked at him without recognizing him. When did my caring boy turn into this angry man? When did this wall grow between us? Francis, I said quietly, I never tried to control your life. I gave you advice because I cared about you, because I wanted the best for you, like any mother would. You always knew what was best for me, didn't you? He grinned bitterly. Except I'm all grown up now, Mom. I can decide for myself what's best for me. And for Judith, too. Judith put her hand on his knee, as if to reassure him. But in her eyes, I saw satisfaction, as if she'd been waiting years for this moment. Francis is right, Agatha, she said in her professional tone. You have to realize that we have our own lives, our own priorities. We can't keep looking over your wishes and expectations. I'm not asking you to look over my wishes, I objected. I'm asking for basic respect. Not to be 2 hours late for a dinner I've been preparing all day. Not to discuss nursing homes behind my back. Not to look at my stuff as future acquisitions. See? Francis threw up his hands. You're always dramatizing everything. Nobody's looking at your things as future acquisitions. We're just concerned about you. We do? I raised an eyebrow. Then why was Judith asking about my will? There was a heavy pause. Francis cast a quick glance at his wife. It was an innocent question, he said at last. At your age, it's important to have all the documents in order. At my age, I shook my head. That's all you talk about. It's like I'm 90 years old and I have one foot in the grave. No one says you're at death's door, Francis sighed. But you're not getting any younger, Mother, and you have to think of the future. Your future, I clarified, about what you'll have when I die. That's not fair. Francis jumped up from his chair. We care about you, and you accuse us of being selfish. Isn't it? I stood up too. When was the last time you came here for no reason at all? When you were interested in my life, not my finances or my possessions? You're insufferable, Francis hissed. Always have been. Daddy was just better at hiding the fact that he was sick of your control and complaints, too. I recoiled as if he'd hit me. Mentioning Howard in that context was painful. Had he really thought that? Had my husband pretended to be happy with me for 35 years? Francis, Judith said warningly. Don't. Yes, you should, he turned to me. You have to know the truth, Mom. You're not a priority anymore. I have my own family, my own life. I can't and won't devote it to you. I stared at him, feeling something inside me snap. Not a priority. All these years of caring, loving, supporting, and just like that, I'm no longer a priority. Francis is being too soft, Judith said, standing up beside her husband. Let's be honest, Agatha. We have a family of our own and you're a burden. All these expectations, the claims, the guilt you're trying to create, it's exhausting. A burden. That word is like a slap in the face. Me, the woman who gave birth to him, raised him, gave all of herself, a burden. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself, not to show how much it hurt me to hear those words, not to let them see that they'd struck a nerve. Okay, I said calmly. I understand your position. They looked surprised. I guess they were expecting tears, screaming, accusations. But I was too stunned to react emotionally. If you don't mind, I'd like to rest, I continued in the same even tone. It's been a long day and I'm tired. Mom, Francis started, but I held up my hand to stop him. There's no need, Francis. You've said it all. You've both said it all. Now I'd like to be alone. I turned and walked toward the stairs, leading up to the second floor, to my bedroom. My back straight, my head up. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me broken. Agatha, Judith called out to me. We just wanted to be honest. Sometimes the truth can be painful, but it's better than living under illusions. I stopped on the first step, but didn't turn around. You told your truth, Judith, and I heard it. Now please go away. I went up the stairs, into the bedroom, and closed the door behind me. Only then did I allow myself to sit on the edge of the bed and exhale. My hands were shaking. My heart was pounding. I heard Francis and Judith talking downstairs. Then the front door slammed. They were gone. The room around me seemed to darken. All these years I had built my life around my family. First Howard and Francis, then, after my husband died, just my son. I always thought it was mutual. That I was important to him too, that he cared for me as much as I cared for him. But today my illusions were shattered. I was nothing more than a burden. And worse, a potential source of inheritance. That's what they were really interested in. My house, my money, my stuff, not me. I stood up and walked to the window. Francis's car was still parked outside the house. They were sitting inside talking about something, arguing, discussing me, planning their next move. Finally, the car pulled away and disappeared around the corner. I was left alone in a quiet house full of memories. What now? How do you move on knowing that your only child thinks you're a burden? That what you leave behind is more important to him than you? I slowly changed into my nightgown, removed my makeup, brushed my hair. Mechanical actions I'd done thousands of times before. But today everything seemed different, as if I was doing it for the last time. I went to bed, but I couldn't sleep. Their words kept running through my mind. You're no longer a priority. You're a burden to us. How easily they'd said it. How easy it was to undo everything that had been between us. And then it hit me. If my things and money are more important to them than I am, why not take that away from them? Why not change the will? The idea came suddenly, but it seemed more and more right every minute. Francis and Judith were only interested in the material side. Well, I could deprive them of that interest. I turned on the bedside lamp and took out a notebook and pen from the nightstand. Started writing down my thoughts, my plans. To whom could I leave my money and possessions? Carol was the obvious choice for part of the inheritance. She was always there for me, supportive, genuinely caring. Community college? I could set up a scholarship for students from low-income families, or the local library. They were always in need of funding. Or the animal shelter where I sometimes volunteered. The options multiplied, and with each new idea, I felt control of my life returning. Yes, Francis and Judith hurt me today, but they had also set me free. Now I could do what I thought was right without worrying about their reactions, without trying to save a relationship that, as it turned out, hadn't existed for a long time. I decided that I would call my lawyer right after the weekend. Mr. Harrington was an older man who'd worked with Howard back in the day. He would help me make a new will, one that reflected my true wishes. For the first time all evening, I felt somewhat relieved. The plan of action was empowering. I wasn't a helpless victim. I could still make decisions, influence my life and the lives of those around me. I turned off the lamp and closed my eyes. Tomorrow would be a new day, and I would start it by revising my will. Not out of revenge, no, out of a sense of justice. Out of a desire that what I have accumulated in my life should go to those who truly value not only material things, but also human relationships. With that thought, I finally fell asleep, feeling strangely calm and determined for the first time in a long time. Francis and Judith had shown me their true selves. Now it was time to show them mine. Monday morning greeted me with clear sunshine. I slept well for the first time in a long time, despite all the turmoil of the day before. Perhaps because I had made a decision and now knew exactly what to do next. After breakfast, I called William Harrington's office. His secretary, Ms. Page, answered after the second ring. Harrington and Associates, how may I help you? Good morning, Ms. Page. This is Agatha Baxter. I need to see Mr. Harrington about changing his will. When does he have some free time? Mrs. Baxter, hello? Miss Page's voice has warmed. Let's see the schedule. Mr. Harrington has an opening at 2 o'clock this afternoon. A client just canceled an appointment. Would that be convenient for you to drive up? Yes, 2 o'clock is perfect, I replied. Thank you, Ms. Page. I'll sign you in. Mr. Harrington will be happy to see you. I hung up the phone, feeling my resolve growing inside me. No doubts, no hesitation. After what Francis and Judith had said yesterday, I knew I was doing the right thing. With a few hours to go before the meeting, I decided to get my financial records in order. I pulled out folders of bank statements, insurance policies, house deeds, and stocks from my secretary. All the things that Francis was supposed to inherit, which would now go to other people. I wasn't sorry, not one bit. Yesterday, something had broken inside, some last thread that connected me to my son. You're no longer a priority. You're a burden to us. Those words kept echoing in my head, but they no longer hurt as much as they did yesterday. Rather, they strengthened my resolve. At 2:30, I was ready. I put on a strict navy blue suit, which I usually use for business meetings. I put my hair in a neat bun and put on my pearl earrings, a gift from Howard. I grabbed my file and left the house. It was a warm, sunny day. On the way to Harrington's office, I pondered my decision. Had I been too harsh on Francis? But every time there was doubt, I remembered Judith's words. We have a family of our own, and you are a burden to us. No, I wasn't too harsh. I was fair. Mr. Harrington's office was located in a small 2-story building downtown. Classic interior, wood paneling, leather chairs. No modern frills, just as it had been 30 years ago when Howard and I had first gone to him for legal help. Miss Page, an elegant woman in her 50s, greeted me with a smile. Mrs. Baxter, good afternoon. Mr. Harrington is expecting you. Please come in. She led me into the office, where William Harrington, a tall, thin man with gray hair and attentive blue eyes, sat behind a solid oak desk. He was well into his 70s, but he continued to work, refusing to retire. Agatha! He rose to meet me, extending his hand. It's good to see you, though I'm surprised. We updated your will after Howard's death, and you were quite happy with the result. Circumstances have changed, William, I replied, shaking his hand and sitting down in the chair across the table. I want to make some significant changes. He looked at me carefully, as if trying to figure out what was behind my words. May I ask what exactly has changed? My relationship with my son, I answered bluntly. I had a conversation yesterday that opened my eyes to a lot of things, and I realized that I didn't want to leave him all my possessions. Harrington nodded. He must have seen a lot of family drama and conflict in his years of practice. I see. And what are your new wishes regarding the distribution of the inheritance? I took out the sheet of paper on which I had sketched my plan that morning. I want to divide the inheritance as follows: 1/3 to my friend Carol Mitchell, 1/3 to the local college for scholarships for underprivileged students, and only the remaining 1/3 to Frances. In doing so, the house should go to Carol, not her son. Harrington took note of my wishes, then looked up. Are you sure, Agatha? Such decisions shouldn't be made in the heat of emotion. I'm absolutely sure, I replied firmly. It's not emotion, William. It's sober calculation. Francis has made it clear that my money and property are more important to him than I am. Well, let him have part of it. The rest would go to those who really cared for me and who would benefit from it. He looked at me carefully for a few seconds, then nodded. Good. I'll prepare all the necessary paperwork. It will take a few days. But I must warn you, Francis may challenge such a will after your death. On what grounds? I asked. I'm of sound mind and judgment, and I'm making this decision voluntarily, without pressure. Exactly so, Harrington nodded. But he could argue that you were incapacitated or under the influence of someone else. It's standard practice in contesting wills. What are his chances of success? Not much if we do it right, Harrington replied. I recommend that you undergo an independent medical examination to confirm your capacity. It's also worth documenting the reasons for changing the will in a separate document. Okay, let's do whatever is necessary, I agreed. I want my will to be executed exactly. We spent the next hour discussing the details. Harrington questioned me at length about each point, clarifying the wording, suggesting various options. I felt that he was sympathetic to my decision, although he tried to make sure that I was acting consciously. Finally, all the details were agreed upon. Harrington promised to have the documents ready by Thursday, and we arranged a meeting to sign them. Agatha, he said as he walked me to the door, I've known you for many years. You've always been a sensible woman. If you made this decision, you had good reasons. But still, think again before Thursday. Family ties are important, and it's not easy to break them. I didn't break those ties, William, I said quietly. They did it themselves when they decided that I was just a burden and a source of future inheritance. As I left Harrington's office, I felt strangely relieved. It was as if a heavy weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I was no longer bound to a son who didn't appreciate the bond. I was free to act in whatever way I felt was right. On my way home, I decided to stop by Carol's house. I needed to talk to someone who really cared about me, and I needed to inform her of my decision to leave her 1/3 of the inheritance and the house. Carol lived in a neat little house about 3 blocks from me. When I pulled up, she was working in the garden, trimming rose bushes. Agatha! She waved her garden shears at me. What a surprise! I was just about to call you. I got out of the car and walked to the gate. Hello, Carol. Can I come in for a cup of tea? There's something I need to tell you. She looked at me carefully, noting my smart suit and serious expression. Of course, come in. I've just finished the roses. We went into the house. Carol quickly washed her hands, put the kettle on, and took out some cookies. Her kitchen was cozy, with yellow curtains and a collection of ceramic figurines on the shelves. "So," she said, pouring the tea, "tell me, how was dinner with Francis and Judith last night?" I took a deep breath and began to tell. About them being late, about the strained conversation at dinner, about how they insisted I move into the nursing home, and finally about their words that changed everything. "You're no longer a priority," I repeated Francis's words. "We have a family of our own and you are a burden to us," Judith added. "Can you imagine?" Carol shook her head, her face expressing genuine sympathy. "Oh, Agatha, I'm so sorry. It's a terrible thing to hear from your own son." You know what the weirdest thing is? I sipped my tea. It doesn't hurt so much now. Yesterday it was like a stabbing. Today I feel more of a, a release, like I've finally seen the truth I've been denying for so long. "What are you going to do now?" "I already have," I answered. "I went to Harrington's today to change the will. Francis will only get a third of the inheritance, not the house." Carol raised her eyebrows in surprise. "And the rest?" "A third to the local college on scholarships," I paused, "and a third, including the house, to you." The cup trembled in her hand. "Me? Agatha, I can't. It's too much." "You can and you should," I said firmly. "You've been there for me all these years, supporting me, caring. You deserve it more than anyone. But Francis, he's your son. Blood from blood. Blood doesn't guarantee love and respect, Carol." I shook my head. "Francis made his choice. Now I'm making mine." We talked for a long time that day. Carol tried to persuade me not to make a hasty decision, to wait, to cool down. But I was adamant. Something had broken yesterday, and it couldn't be undone. "Are you sure you won't regret it?" Carol asked as I was about to leave. "Absolutely," I answered. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was doing the right thing. When I got home, I checked my phone. No calls, no messages from Francis. It was like last night had meant nothing, like they hadn't hurt me deeply with their words. But I didn't expect any different. Now that the illusions were gone, I could see their true attitude toward me. I was just a burden to be put up with because of a potential inheritance. Well, they would soon find out that the inheritance would not be what they had hoped for. On Tuesday, I did the usual chores. I did the laundry, went to the store, watered the flowers in the garden. Francis still hadn't called. I'd checked my phone out of habit, but I wasn't expecting him to call anymore. It was a strange feeling, a mixture of resentment and release. Carol called in the evening. "How are you?" she asked. "I'm fine," I replied. "Doing chores, thinking about the future." "Did Francis call?" "No," I grinned. "He won't. I'm sure he and Judith think they're right, and I should be the one apologizing for my unreasonableness." "Maybe you should call." Carol suggested it. "After all, he is your son." "No," I said firmly. "That's enough. I'd made too many concessions for too long, trying to preserve a relationship that wasn't really there anymore. Now let him take the initiative if he cared." But the phone was silent on Wednesday, too. 3 days had passed since that dinner, and no call, no message, no apology, no attempt at reconciliation. Just silence. That silence spoke louder than any words. It confirmed that I had made the right decision. If Francis and Judith were so indifferent to my condition after their cruel words, then they didn't deserve my inheritance. On Wednesday evening, I received a call from Harrington. "Agatha, the papers are ready," he informed me. "Can you come over at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning to sign them?" "Yes, I will," I replied. "Thank you, William. You haven't changed your mind?" I could hear the concern in his voice. "No," I said firmly. "I'm as sure of my decision as I've ever been." "Good," he sighed. "I'll see you tomorrow then." I sat back in my chair and stared at the family photo on the mantelpiece for a long time. Howard and I and little Francis smiling, happy. When did everything change? When did my loving son turn into this cold, calculating man? Maybe it was Judith. Maybe it was the money and status that had become more important to him than family values. Or maybe I'd made a mistake in raising him. But it didn't matter now. Tomorrow I will sign a new will, and part of my inheritance will go to those who really need and appreciate not only material goods. It was the right decision. I felt it with all my heart. I looked at the phone. 3 days of silence. 3 days in which my son hadn't taken the time or inclination to call and see how I was doing. After all that had been said, after all the hurtful words, that silence was more eloquent than any apology. It showed Francis and Judith's true attitude toward me, and it strengthened my resolve to change my will. Tomorrow, I'll sign the papers and the world will change. Francis and Judith won't know for a while. Harrington will keep it confidential, as a lawyer should. But one day they will. And then perhaps we'll realize that money and property, not the most important thing in life. That human relationships, caring and respect are worth so much more. Thursday morning, I woke up with a sense of determination. Today was going to change everything. I showered, put on the strict black suit I usually save for special occasions, and headed to Harrington's office. The weather was clear, sunny. May in Villa Park always brought warmth and blossoms. The apple and cherry trees in the neighbors' orchards were covered in a white and pink cloud of blossoms, and tulips mottled brightly in the front gardens. Life went on, despite all the upheaval. Harrington greeted me with his usual reserved smile. "Good morning, Agatha. How are you feeling?" "Calm," I answered honestly. "Confident." He nodded, looking at me carefully over his glasses. "The papers are ready. I've prepared everything as we discussed. 1/3 of the inheritance, including the house, to your friend Carol Mitchell. 1/3 to the local college for scholarships, and 1/3 to Francis, but no claim to the house." "That's right," I confirmed. "Good." He spread the papers out on the table. "Then read them carefully and sign them if you agree with all the points." I took my time reading each line. Harrington was meticulous and thoughtful. Every point was clearly stated, leaving no room for variation. When I was satisfied that everything was in accordance with my wishes, I signed the will in the presence of 2 witnesses, Miss Page and another member of the firm. "That's it," Harrington said, sealing the documents. "Your will is officially recorded. You will receive a copy of the will in the mail within a week, and we will keep the original." "Thank you, William." I shook his hand. "For everything." "You're welcome." He smiled slightly. "I hope you won't regret your decision." "I won't," I said confidently. As I left the office, I felt strangely light. It was as if a heavy weight had fallen from my shoulders. The decision was made. The documents were signed. Now I could move on. On the way home, I stopped at a cafe I loved, a small, cozy place overlooking the park. I ordered a cup of coffee and a blueberry muffin. I sat watching the passers-by, thinking about the future. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly free. Free of expectations, free of guilt, free of having to conform to the role of a mother who forgives and tolerates everything. Back home, I decided to do some gardening. It was a lovely day for outdoor work. I put on an old pair of jeans, a t-shirt, and a straw hat. I went out into the yard with my gardening tools and began trimming the overgrown hydrangea bushes. Working in the garden always calmed me. There was something meditative about the process, removing excess, shaping, creating space for growth. Maybe that's what I was doing now with my life too, getting rid of toxic relationships, making room for something new and healthy. I was so engrossed that I didn't immediately hear my phone ring. Straightening up, I wiped my hands on my jeans and went inside. Francis's name popped up on the screen. For the first time in 4 days. I paused for a second before answering. Then I took a deep breath and pressed the green button. "Hello? Mom?" Francis sounded worried. "What's going on? I just got a call from Ben Parker, who works at Harrington's firm. He said you're changing your will. Is that true?" Ben Parker is a junior partner at Harrington and an old friend of Francis's. They went to college together. Apparently, he saw my name on the paperwork and decided to warn his friend. It was unprofessional, but not surprising. "Yes, it's true," I replied calmly. "I changed the will. But why?" There was panic in his voice. "What happened?" "You know exactly what happened, Francis." I sat back in my chair, preparing for a long conversation. "On Sunday, you told me I was no longer a priority. Judith called me a burden. After that, you didn't call for 4 days, didn't ask how I was doing. And now you're surprised I revised my will? Mom, you've got it all wrong." His voice became pleading. "Judith and I didn't mean that. We're just tired. It's been a long day." The words just came out on their own. The words that come out of their own mouths are usually the most sincere, I said. But it's not even about the words. It's what happened afterward. 4 days of silence, Francis. And you only called when you found out about the will. Only when it was about the money. That's not true, he was almost shouting. I was going to call you tonight. I wanted to give you time to cool off. Think about it. Don't lie to me, I said quietly, but firmly. Don't make it worse. You called because of the will, and we both know it. There was silence. Then Judith's voice came through. Francis must have put it on speakerphone. Agatha, let's talk like adults. Her tone was professional and friendly, as if she were talking to an important client. I admit I was a bit harsh on Sunday. I said some things I didn't mean, but that's no reason to make such drastic decisions. What kind of decisions, Judith? I asked. You don't know exactly what I changed in the will. Ben told me that you disinherited most of Francis's estate. Her voice trembled. Is that true? Ben violated client confidentiality, I pointed out. That's a serious breach of professional ethics. But yes, I did revise the distribution of the inheritance. Francis will get a third, not including the house. A third? Francis exclaimed. But, who gets the rest? That's none of your business, I replied. You said yourself that I'm no longer a priority, so you don't have to worry about my decisions either. Mom, please! His voice sounded pleading. Let's meet and talk calmly. I admit I was wrong. We were both wrong, but don't do something you'll regret. I won't regret it, I said firmly. The decision's made, the papers are signed. And you know what, Francis? I'm relieved. For the first time in a long time, I've done what I think is right, not what someone else expects me to do. You can't do that, Judith intervened. This is Francis's inheritance. He's your only son. Who thinks I'm a burden, I reminded her. Who didn't take the time to call after he'd said the cruelest words I'd ever heard from a loved one. Who only remembered me when it came to money. We'll come, Francis said firmly. Now. We need to talk in person. No, I was adamant. I don't want to see you, not now. Maybe someday when the pain's gone, but not today. Mom. I said no, Francis. At least respect that decision. There was silence again. Then Judith spoke again, her voice sounding businesslike. All right, Agatha, let's make a deal. We admit we were wrong. We apologize for everything we said. We promise to visit you more often, to be more attentive. And you'll return everything back to the way it was with the will. That's a fair trade, isn't it? I laughed. I couldn't help it. Even now, she saw our relationship as a business deal. Judith, you don't understand. This isn't about a deal. It's not about getting more attention from you or apologizing. This is about me finally seeing the truth. I've seen who you think I am. And that's not going to change with promises you make just for the money. It's not about money, Francis exclaimed. Mom, please believe me, I love you. Yes, I've been rude, I've said terrible things, but that doesn't mean I don't love you. If you loved me, Francis, you would have called the next day. Apologized. Asked how I was, but you didn't. You only called when you found out about the will. I was afraid. His voice shook. Afraid you wouldn't want to talk to me. That I'd screw things up even more. So you decided not to try at all? I shook my head even though he couldn't see it. You know what the saddest part is? I would have forgiven you. If you'd called the next day, apologized, I would have forgiven you. Because I'm your mother, and I loved you no matter what. But you didn't. And now it's too late. Don't say that. I could hear the tears in his voice. Please, Mom, give us another chance. A chance for what, Francis? To pretend you care about me until I die and leave you everything? No, thank you. I prefer honesty, even if it's painful. What can we do? Judith asked, her voice sounding confused. There must be a way to make things right. Nothing, I answered firmly. I have made my decision and it is final. Francis will get a third of the inheritance. That's more than most children get from their parents. And that's all he can expect. Who did you leave the rest to? Francis asked after a pause. Carol? None of your business, I repeated. But if you're so interested, yes, Carol will get a third, including the house. She's been there for me all these years, supportive, caring. She deserves it. And the last third, he wouldn't stop. To the community college, scholarships for low-income students. You're giving our money to strangers? Judith was outraged. It's my money, Judith, I said calmly. and I'm going to use it as I see fit. We'll contest the will, she said suddenly, after you're dead. Say you were incapacitated or that Carol influenced you. You can try, I smiled, though they couldn't see it. But Harrington had it covered. I've had an independent medical examination confirming my capacity. And I've put in writing my reasons for changing my will, including what you said about me being a burden. There was silence again. Then Frances took a deep breath. Mom, I don't know what else to say. I've been awful. I realize I hurt you. And I apologize, I really do. Not for the money, but because you're my mother and I don't want to lose you. His words sounded sincere, but it was too late. Something was broken inside and I didn't know if it could be fixed. I accept your apology, Frances, I said quietly. But it won't change my mind. Perhaps in time we can rebuild some kind of relationship, but it will be different. One based on mutual respect, not on the expectation of an inheritance. I understand. His voice sounded broken. Can I come visit you this weekend? Just to talk. Without Judith, if you don't want to see her. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say yes, to give him a chance. But the other part knew it was too soon. The wound was too fresh. Not now, Frances. I need time. I'll call you when I'm ready. Okay, he said quietly. I love you, Mom, no matter what. And I loved you, Frances. Always. I hung up the phone, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Sadness, relief, determination. This conversation had confirmed that I had made the right decision. They only called about the money, only when it came to the inheritance. The phone rang again almost immediately. This time it was Carol. Agatha? You're not going to believe this. Judith just called me. Let me guess, I grinned. Asking her to influence me to put everything back the way it was with the will? Yes, she did, Carol exclaimed. At first she was as sweet as ever, saying what a wonderful friend I was to you. And then she suggested $50,000 if I could get you to change your mind. And what did you say? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. I told her to go fuck herself, of course. Carol snorted. I told her I wasn't for sale, and that if she tried to bribe me again, I'd tell you, although I see you already know that. Yeah, they just called me, I sighed. Frances was acting remorseful. Judith was trying to make a deal. Typical Baxter family day. What did you tell them? That the decision had been made and was non-negotiable, I replied. That maybe in time Frances and I could rebuild some kind of relationship, but it would be different. You're good. I could hear the pride in Carol's voice. Standing up for yourself isn't easy, especially when it comes to your own children. You know, I said after a pause, I think I'm finally free. From expectations, from guilt, from having to be the good mom who forgives and tolerates everything. And it's an amazing feeling. It should be, Carol agreed. By the way, I signed up for those art classes we talked about. There are more places if you want to join, art classes. I've been wanting to take one since high school, but I've always had more important things to do. First school, then work, family, raising Frances. I've always put my wishes on hold. You know what? I'd love to join, I said firmly. It's about time I started doing something I've always wanted to do. Oh, that's great, Carol was excited. Classes start next Tuesday. One more thing. I booked us a tour of Italy for September. 2 weeks, Rome, Florence, Venice, the Amalfi Coast. If you want to, of course. A trip to Italy. Another long-time dream I've been putting off. First, Howard didn't want to go that far. Then there were health problems. Then he was gone. I do, I said firmly. I definitely do. After talking to Carol, I went back to the garden. I continued to trim the hydrangeas, thinking about the future, about the art course, about the trip to Italy, about all the things I'd always wanted to do but had put off. Strangely, I didn't feel bitter about breaking up with Frances. It was more like a sense of closure. It was as if one chapter of life had closed and a new one had opened, brighter, freer. Of course it hurt. It hurt to realize that my son, whom I loved with all my heart, thought of me as nothing more than a burden. That money and possessions were more important to him than our relationship. But that pain was no longer tearing me up inside. It had become part of the experience, part of me, accepted and lived. In the evening, I sat on the veranda watching the sunset and sipping mint tea. My mind was spinning with plans for the future. An art course, a trip to Italy, Maybe even a little renovation of the house I'd been thinking about for a long time. The phone rang again. Francis. I didn't answer it. Let her wait. This was my time, my life, and I was going to live it the way I wanted to live it, not the way anyone else expected me to live it. Maybe someday I'd be ready to talk to him again. Maybe we could build a new relationship, a more honest, more equal relationship. But not now. Right now, I was savoring my freedom, my new beginning. I looked up at the starry sky, smiled, and thought, Howard, you'd be proud of me tonight. And somehow I was sure he would be proud. He'd always told me to be strong, to stand my ground, to not let anyone sit on my neck, even if it's our son. Today I took his advice. And though the journey was painful, the result was worth it. I was finally free from illusions, from false hopes, from having to conform to other people's expectations. There was a new chapter ahead, my chapter, and I couldn't wait to start writing it.